Welcome to the LBF Church podcast, where we talk about issues that are related to how we grow in our affections towards Jesus and grow more equipped to follow him in the ways he's leading us. So I'm Dan Franklin with my friend Jakari Johnson, both members here at the church. And Jakari, why don't you just talk a little bit about your role here at the church and different things you've been a part of?
Yeah, my wife and I, we've been members here for about 5 years. We have 3 beautiful children. Some of the things that we do, as far as what I do, is I help out with the men's Wednesday night Bible study. I'm one of the teachers that you would find to be there. I also help out with some other studies that we have here at the church. Me and Dan did a few things together in the past. We also have the privilege of leading a life group, my wife and I together. It's just fun times. We've been having a good time at the church.
Yeah. And so a lot of you, if you're part of LBF Church, you've probably seen or heard from Jakari at a different time. But what we're going to talk about today is the subject of anger. And this is something that we've had conversations about. And so we wanted to even narrow it to say, we want to talk about the role that anger plays in the lives of men, and specifically how it relates to our families. And so for both of us, being married, having 3 kids each, this is something that's pretty personal to us. But let's just spend a little bit of time talking about how have we seen anger impact our family lives?
It's actually quite
honest moments here.
And we can laugh about it because I never knew that having such a beautiful wife and 3 wonderful children could make me so upset. You never really imagined that. I think I really had to come to the realization that I was an angry person. I used to always say to myself, well, I have these angry moments. I have things that really make me upset. But I never actually said to myself, no, I'm actually a person that's always angry. Not always, but I'm just in general an angry person.
Yeah, there's like a baseline.
There's a baseline. Yeah. There's things that could really upset me. Like, I never knew potty training. I never knew that changing a squirmy kid on the changing table. I never knew that constant not doing what I'm asking you to do. All this from the kids, by the way. And then with Mel, with my wife, sometimes the eye roll or the offsetting tone that she may use. And all this can happen within 15 minutes of me waking up in the morning. That doesn't include what's about to happen outside. With all these things hitting me, I constantly have to say to myself, don't be angry today.
Yeah.
Just, Lord, lead me. Don't allow myself to be angry and don't allow these things to really get to me. My dad used to always tell me as a kid, he used to say, and he even tells me today, son, you have to have thick skin. I find myself still developing that thick skin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the things that can be shocking and also can even bring some guilt is just the idea of saying, and both you and I could say this, where we look at it and say, man, compared to the world, got things really good. Like, got a wife who's stuck with me and is a beautiful woman, got these 3 kids who are all relatively healthy. And yet to still see not only anger play a role in our lives, but anger even towards the people that we love the most and we most want to take care of that we can find. I've joked before where I've said, especially with my kids, how can somebody I love so much infuriate me to this level? And part of what we want to talk about is just even the stakes of this. This is something yesterday we were talking about why it's so significant that we as men, all of us as men, but especially in the context of our families, that we figure this out because the stakes are high for us as men.
Stakes are very high. Whether we as men want to realize it or not, we have been given the responsibility of being the head of our household. There are many men out there who don't necessarily want to step into this responsibility just because they kind of feel like if we don't acknowledge it, then maybe that leadership role doesn't exist. But irregardless of how you may feel about it, God has made you the leader of your particular household. In preparation for this, I came across a great quote by Pastor Vudi Bacham, where it just says that a man is the head, master, and leader of his home, and there is nothing he can do about that. He will either lead effectively or he will lead poorly, but he will lead. A man's failing to lead is actually a man's leading in failure.
And that's really well said, because I think that reflects the priority of Scripture. And it's a funny thing in our culture, because obviously in our culture it's a politically incorrect thing to say, the husband or the man is the head of the home.
Right.
One of the funny things about Scripture is that there's never a passage where Paul or anyone else says, men, go be the head of the home. Just says, you are the head of the home. Like, that's just a reality of the whole thing. And I think that quote puts that in there to say, when we're talking about our anger, the stakes are high because whether we're doing it on purpose or not, we are setting a tone. Everything that we do as men is setting a tone in our house, and we're leading for better or for worse.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just love how you said we set the tone, because one of the things that I think about is the instructions we get as far as ministers and leaders and pastors from Paul, when he was talking to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 3, when he's talking about how we should be above reproach.
Sure.
We should be self-controlled. We should have the respect of our children. We should also have the respect of our wives, mainly because our leadership capability is displayed by how we run our household. I've come to that realization that if I'm walking around my house angry, if I'm walking around my house grouchy, that has a great trickle-down effect.
Yeah.
Mel, she can be upset, she could be angry, and it has no effect on the house. But me, as the man of the household, if I'm angry, one of these other kids might get angry. Somebody might start yelling. There's just great effects to me being angry. So I have to always constantly remind myself that regardless of what the situation is, I set the tone.
Yeah. And I think there's something, I was just, in Colossians chapter 3, it's one of those passages where Paul kind of does the rapid fire, like a word to husbands, a word to wives, a word to kids, a word to parents. And I just wanted to read it because it's striking. So to husbands, he says, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. And then to fathers, he says, fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged. And I was just struck with the idea of both times he's speaking to men, he's basically warning against anger, saying, don't be harsh to your wives, don't embitter your children. So the struggle that we're talking about isn't just a Jakari struggle or a Dan struggle. At least Paul is assuming this is going to be somewhere at the center of the man's struggle. And in another passage, in 1 Timothy 2, when Paul he's given church instructions to the men and then to the women, he says one thing to the men in verse 8. He says, therefore, I want men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. Sort of like, all right, there's a theme going on. Paul seems to think anger is a big deal with men. And so as we're talking about this, we're talking about what presumably is going to be one of our lifelong battles. And the stakes are high, as you mentioned. Stakes are high for our families to start to figure this out.
Yeah, it's truly going to be something I would think is a lifelong battle.
Yeah.
It's just something that I know, and just in talking to other men who are husbands and also fathers, and even ones who are single, it's just something that we struggle with.
Yeah.
And I think a major reason why a lot of us as men struggle is because we don't like to have our pride ticked. We have this high degree of pride, and whenever we feel like we've been offended by something, whenever we feel like our command has not been listened to, if I can use that word lightly, that is when our anger is typically going to strike.
Yeah, which is probably true, just because when you think of the whole the theme of respect and just how significant that is to us as men, how life-giving respect is, when that's squelched, when there's disrespect, man, that's when it's not to excuse it, but just, man, we can put our back, we can get ready to, all right, them's fighting words. I'm ready to try to defend my respectability. And so in taking that in, before getting into some things that we can share from our own lives and from Scripture about positive steps we can take, let's just talk about. In fact, I want to say one of the things you talked about yesterday that I'd love for you to share is just how expectations play into the presence of anger in our lives.
Yeah, I had to really have a check myself moment. I think we all have to have these from time to time, because we go into our marriages thinking that it's going to be one thing, and then it turns out to be something totally different. I think that sometimes we as men, we could be overburdensome on our wives and on our children because we expect them to do things that aren't necessarily realistic. A lot of us as men, we have these situations where we expect things to be done our particular way in our particular time, and when it doesn't happen that way, we've already set ourselves up for failure because we're already going to be upset about something. The one thing that I'm trying to learn to do within my 9 years of marriage so far, and the 5 years that we've had our children, is to just extend grace. Extend grace in a number of these situations where things may not be done the way I would like them to be done, but at the same time, I have a wife who works hard. I have kids who are just loving and playful. And no, they're not going to always follow my instructions.
Not even the 5-year-old.
Not even the 5-year-old. No, they're just. I don't want to set the bar so high. My wife always tells me you don't want to put the bar so high up here to where your kids aren't able to do the things that you need for them to do. And I think as men, we just want our kids to follow our instructions. We want our kids to follow our lead. We want our kids at the end of the day to do what we want them to do.
I think it's actually one of the positive things that men bring to the table that I think with women, there is a lot of compassion and a lot of grace. And with men, one of the positive things that we bring to the table is saying there are also standards. There are also expectations. But the danger, like you were talking about, of the expectations, you just think of it from a family perspective and say, it could be easy for us as men to get into family life and say, all right, so I'm going to have a wife who's going to be happy with me and make my life, you're already laughing, who's going to be happy with me, who's going to make my life easier because she's going to do some of the things that I would rather not do. And then I'm going to have kids, and the kids are going to be great to play with, and they're going to bring me a sense of, kind of pride and just, my offspring. And that's what it's sort of going to be like. And that's very different from what we would have as our expectations if we just read the scriptural calling for husbands and for fathers, where we're saying, all right, with the same passage where Paul says the husband is the head of the wife, he then says, so your job is to lay down your life for her. So our expectation in marriage, we probably wouldn't be nearly as angry if we were going into marriage saying, when I say I do with this woman, I am saying I lay down my life, I sacrifice for her, her needs come before my own. When I father these children, then all right, my expectation is that I pour myself out to raise them, to train them, to think about what's going to be best for them. If I'm disciplining them, it's not because I'm just mad at them, it's because I'm trying to train them and lead them in a positive way. If we had that framework, our expectations would be thwarted a lot less, because we wouldn't go in with the expectations of, hey, why isn't this house clean? Or why isn't he respecting me? Or why doesn't she think my idea is a great idea? We'd realize we're there to be pouring ourselves out, not there to have the privilege of headship or the privilege of whatever might go into that whole deal.
Yeah, it's really changing our mindset from how can my needs be met to how could I now become a servant? Yeah. And I mean, I just truly believe the greatest example we have of this is Jesus Christ. I love how he says, I didn't come to be served, but I came to serve. And yes, we have his death and obviously his resurrection, and that gives us our salvation. But one of the most powerful images that we have of this being displayed is how he washed his disciples' feet. Here it was where he should be the one, as God the Son, he should be the one to have his feet washed. But yet he humbles himself as a servant and says, I am going to wash my disciples' feet. In the same way that Christ came to be a servant, we have to be a servant of our wives and also be a servant of our children. The way somebody said it to me once is that your wife is not just your wife, she's God's daughter. We have been entrusted with God's daughters. That's a major responsibility. It's a major thing to take in. We have been entrusted with God's daughters in the sense of, how can I serve her best? What can I do to feed life into my marriage and not anger?
Yeah.
What can I do to feed love into my children and not destruction? What is God calling me to do daily to where I speak goodness and holiness and righteousness into what I have, and to not bring, again, death, destruction, anger, and other things that could totally mess everything up.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a minute, we'll get into sharing things that we feel like God has shown us or taught us in practical ways, but just in kind of introing that, building off what we've talked about, if we're going to talk about this, I think one of the things that we want to do as we talk about practical ways to deal with our anger is to recognize that the event that triggers our anger is often not the main reason we're angry. Mm-hmm. And so just like we're talking about, saying, gosh, I love these kids, I love this woman, why, but I get so upset. Sometimes the triggering event is just as simple as my kid kicked me in the shin, or something like that. Mm-hmm. It could be that. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes, for me, the thing that I try to go back is to say, all right, I'm snapping at my family a lot, or I'm snapping at my kids a lot. What's going on? And usually the solution for me is not, well, my kids have just been especially bad. Usually it's, I'm mad about something else. I'm mad about something going on at work. I'm mad because I feel like somebody slighted me in some way. Sometimes it's not even a personal thing. Sometimes I'm just mad about something going on in the world. I'm just like, I'm mad about politicians yelling at each other. So now I'm mad at my kids.
All the negativity that's out there. Right.
And so just to get that, I think part of this is kind of in the area of spiritual formation, just to say, all right, that brings us to go before God and say, if my baseline is that I'm just sort of angry at the world, well, then, of course, the people who are around me the most are going to be affected the most. And so I think it's important for us to get over the illusion of, well, I'm angry because of my kids or because of my wife. Sometimes, I would argue most of the time, no. They're just the ones who are closest when we find ourselves angry.
The question just really has to be asked, okay, what is it that drives me to become angry? What makes us as husbands and fathers so angry at our particular families? Is it a need to display our dominance? Anger isn't always necessarily a sin, because our kids are going to do things that make us angry. It becomes sinful when it's motivated by pride. When our anger goes unchecked, if you will, or it's allowed to boil over, it gets us to a point where we're capable of lashing out without any restraint. And we just leave a wake of devastation with just right in front of us or right behind us. And the thing about anger is it really doesn't care who it hurts. It doesn't really care who it devastates. I mean, I don't think many of us realize this, but anger hurts us. It hurts us in the sense that it eats away at our soul and it quenches the spirit that is within us. It hurts our spouse. Anger causes this friction. It breaks communication. It causes the lack of intimacy, and it can ultimately destroy our marriage. And then when you get into our children, if all they see is dad be angry, or if they're constantly seeing dad be angry, that can lead our children to become angry. One of our sons, our oldest, he has these periodic temper tantrums, and I've often wondered, is my child angry because dad is angry? Have I fed a little bit of my anger into my child? That's something that can often come across my mind.
And I think especially, I know your two oldest are boys, and all three of mine are boys. I think in particular, we as dads, whether we're being overt about it or not, our sons are looking at us and saying, well, that's what a man does. That's what a man is supposed to act like. So if they're picking up from us like, oh yeah, totally acceptable for a man just every so often when he feels slighted, just to fly off the handle, put everybody in their place, and then move on with his life. Or, and this is even when we get into practical, because we'll transition now and just say, all right, what are practical things? And I know you have some scripture to share too. We can bring that in, but just what are practical ways that we combat letting anger have its way in our lives? I know for me, one of the main ways that I do this is by making sure I go back and apologize to my kids and humbling myself. And it's funny because this might be different than how you parent. Some people might think this is bad parenting, but one of the things I really try to be clear on my boys with is there will be some times that they'll find themselves in a situation where they're in trouble. And I'll, again, you'll think I'm a jerk, but I'll say, whose fault this is? And I'll say, it's your fault. That this isn't because mom and dad just got mad at you. You brought this on yourself. And so there's sometimes that I flip the script when, so say I snap at my middle son, Jack, and then later I go talk to him and I say, hey, Jack, I snapped at you. You know whose fault that is? And he says, mine. I say, no. That was my fault. I was wrong. I want to ask you to forgive me. I should never act that way towards you. And so that's a positive thing to do. And also, it really makes me not want to screw up. Because who likes to go and apologize to anyone, let alone your kid? I'm like, I don't want to be in a position where I have to apologize. So just cultivating that habit of saying, if we do that, if we show our kids, hey, when you mess up, you apologize, you ask forgiveness. I think that also, at least for me, that sort of subconsciously makes me say, I don't want to fly off the handle because I don't want to be in that position where I have to go back and try to fix what I've broken.
Yeah. A lot of times for me, it's just remembering that I set the tone. It's just remembering that my kids are going to follow my lead. So let's just say, for example, I do happen to go off on their mom, or I do happen to go off on them. I take the same practice as you do because we don't like to sweep anything under the rug in our house. So one of the things that I'll do is if I said something in front of the kids to my wife that I shouldn't have, is typically I'll gather them all together and I'll say, sons, this is not how you are supposed to speak to your wife. And I'll say, honey, I apologize. Or if I did something with the kids where I'd said something I wasn't supposed to, there's definitely a moment of apology, whether it be just individually to that child who I went off on, or it could be all of them. I definitely let my children know if there was something that they did that made me upset. I take the same approach that you do.
But both things can be true.
Yes.
You can say, I shouldn't have done that. You also shouldn't have done that.
And that's exactly what we do.
Both can be true at the same time.
And that's exactly what we do. Daddy should not have went off the way he did, but at the same time, this is something that you did that really upset me.
Yeah.
So this is something that we need to work on to make sure that we clean it up for next time.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have reacted in this way, but please understand, this is what made me upset to begin with.
Yeah.
So we definitely have that conversation. I think we do a pretty good job of that in the house, is not letting anything go unsaid, not just sweeping anything under the rug. If we make a mistake, just let's apologize about it. Let's get it out there and let's just move on.
Yeah. And I think one of the other practical ways, and this is a way that I think as husbands and wives, we can help each other, but just thinking, all right, if we're taking the lead as men, is just to have times where Karina and I will say, where we tag each other out with the kids. Mm-hmm. Man, we both have the privileges of having wives who are mainly staying at home with the kids and caring for the kids. Yep. So the idea that there's valuable times where we as men can tag out our wives, especially if they spend a lot of time with the kids, and we'll take turns. It's funny. There will be some times that I can tell with Karina, like, all right, the kids are on her last nerve, and I'm like, hey, everybody come over with me. I'm feeling great about life. And there are other times where she senses with me that I'm starting to. It's starting to ramp up, and she'll sort of step in. And so I think even for us, a practical thing is just to say, all right, if we as men start to see it coming, we can, and we have a wife who's willing to help us out. It can be valuable just to say, hey, honey, I'm really starting to run down. Is there any way you can help me just get 15 minutes, just get half an hour? I think I'll be a better dad if I can get a breather here. And I would assume most of the time, if you're married, your wife is going to be happy to help with that. She's going to get that.
Right. I just can't think of the number of times where my kids have made me frustrated about the simplest things. Yeah. And Mel comes in and she fixes the situation just with the lightness of her voice.
That's right.
Like, there'll be plenty of times where I'm trying to get them ready, or I'm trying to brush their teeth and do something like that. Let's take brush teeth, for example, because this is one thing that can really frustrate me, is when they don't allow you to brush their teeth. They move your hand continually. They swallow the toothpaste. And I can strictly remember one day.
Do it myself.
Do it myself thing.
Doing it myself.
I can strictly remember one day when I was with Owen in the restroom, and he's just moving my hand constantly. And I'm like, babe, I can't take this anymore. Can you please come in and help me? Can you brush his teeth?
Tag out.
Please, tag me out. Just do something. She simply comes in with the gentlest mannerisms and just says, have you given him something to hold so he doesn't grab the toothbrush? And I said, no, I haven't tried that. So she simply gives him the container of toothpaste, and I am able to finish brushing his teeth. The simplest things that our wives can do sometimes that we just don't think about because we're so hot in the moment.
Yeah.
That we just haven't taken a second to step back and just pause and say, okay, what's the simplest way that I can fix this situation?
Yeah. And that's even good perspective, just saying, like, if we're married and we're treating our wives as allies, that's going to help us with the kids. That's going to help us with one another, because that's going to help us be a team in those situations.
Absolutely. Yeah. No question
about
it.
Well, let me just ask you this. As we get ready to kind of wrap this up, any kind of like final thought or counsel or scripture that you would want to say as kind of a parting shot? Here's something I'd love men in these kinds of situations to think about. Yeah,
this scripture really just stood out to me. It really resonated with me after I read it. And it's from Ephesians 4:26-27. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. The devil is looking for any way that he can attack our families. He's looking for any way that he can seep into our household or into our marriage to cause friction, to cause separation. Anytime you have two people who are on the same page, wanting to do the things of the Lord, the devil is going to find some way to seep in and separate that. So one of the things that we have to always keep in our mind is, regardless of how mad I am in a situation, regardless of how angry this has made me, we have to do the best we can to not allow the devil to have a foothold within our marriage, to not find any crack that is there to where he can cause separation, even if it's temporary. We have to do the best we can to man our household in a godly fashion to where, okay, this made me upset. I'm going to take a second. I'm going to walk away. And I'm going to come back and talk about it when my mindset about the situation is better. Because there are so many things that we can say wrong within our time of anger. And the one thing I love about Scripture is it not only reveals to us what is wrong with anger, but it also equips us in how to deal with anger. You also have Proverbs 19:11. A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. Proverbs 14:29. Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly or foolishness. Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. They're just all these constant reminders of the danger of anger, but yet how we can utilize it in a good fashion by not allowing it to get us out of our character, to not allow it to get us past what the Spirit wants us to do.
We can treat it as an indicator, not as
how I should react.
Not as I've got to follow this lead, but this is an indicator, and I can use that usefully.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a good word, and a good word for us just to close on. If you have thoughts on this, as we've talked about this, especially if you're a man dealing with this in your life, or if you're a woman, maybe you look at this and you say, the man in my life is dealing with this and I want to figure out how I can help, or I'm dealing with this and I want to figure out how I can handle this. You can check out this and other episodes of the LBF Church podcast on our church's website, lbf.church, and just click on the tab that says blog and podcast. Leave us a comment, leave us a question. Jakari and I would both love to engage on that, share our thoughts, share some scripture, and look to be helpful. You can also download all the episodes of the LBF Church podcast on iTunes, and we always love it if you leave a review or rating or subscribe, because that helps us. Our goal here is to get more good content out so that people can grow in their affections towards Jesus and grow more equipped to follow him. So thanks so much for taking the time to watch. On behalf of Jakari, I'm Dan, and this is the LBF Church podcast.